As I sit here right here and now, I genuinely believe with every being of my fibre that Zack Snyder still wants to restore the Snyderverse. I have no doubt on that. It's been another interesting week in the world of DC live action. We've had Zack Snyder post on Twitter, which is a rarity in itself, that he can't wait to take the kids to see Blue Beetle. We were all kind of miffed and confused about that. But good luck to the guy, and he's being supportive to a company that have treated him like utter shit. And if you think the new leadership are not as bad in the treatment of Zack Snyder, we've discussed the new documentary and how they put Justice League footage of Justice League instead of Zack Snyder's Justice League footage. They refused to put Zack Snyder's Justice League footage in this DC celebratory documentary. So there you have it. But he's supporting their movie. It's interesting. Then we got Jay Oliver, you know, the artist from Man of Steel and BVS, saying, you know, revealing and leaking Zack Snyder's plans for a climactic ending to the Snyderverse with a Flashpoint movie that reveals Reverse Flash, aka Eobard Thawne, as the big bad. I mean, Zack's always spoken about doing a Flashpoint movie to finish everything off and give the new creatives a new sheet to write upon. So Zack was always doing that, but it's not going away. We've also seen details of Ben Affleck's The Batman movie, a movie I know a great deal about. And one thing we can all say, even the ones who say they hate Zack Snyder and think he's Hack Snyder instead of Zack Snyder, must admit, all these revelations about the Snyderverse and its potential, what we were going to get in all of these movies, sounds amazing. And it sounds like an opportunity missed. So let me kind of go back to what we would have had. I want you to remember the Johnson Berg era, the disastrous Walter Hamada era, as well. The flops we've had. Zack Snyder was going to give us Man of Steel. Straight out the bat, he was going to give us Man of Steel 2. I believe that Ben Affleck's The Batman movie originally was going to be kind of a deep dive, same thing that's been described by Jay Oliver this week, but there was going to be no Batman versus Superman originally, and Ben Affleck's The Batman movie would have been the big introduction for Ben Affleck's Batfleck, which would have been a lot better of an idea. But we did get BVS. They did force Zack to do a BVS movie because they didn't believe in Superman on his own, and he did a damn good job. It's one of the best movies I've ever seen, no question about that. But that wasn't the original plan. So Man of Steel 2, Ben Affleck's The Batman. We were going to get Ray Fisher starring in a cyborg movie. Ray Fisher is more perfect casting from Zack Snyder. So we were going to get a cyborg movie as well. Now, I don't know if we were going to get a Flash origin movie before we got the Flashpoint movie. That was going to be kind of very, very interesting. But I think Flashpoint was always the way Zack was going at it. But the way Machete and Hamada went after Flashpoint simply didn't work. So Man of Steel 2, Ben Affleck's The Batman, definitely a cyborg movie. 3 Justice League movies, Justice League 2, Justice League 3, maybe a Green Lantern movie as well, who knows, and eventually a Flashpoint movie. And of course, don't forget, we got Wonder Woman 2017 that Zack co-wrote and I believe ghost directed in places. How can I forget that? And I assume that Zack would have brought someone in, because James Wan wasn't his choice, to make an Aquaman movie as well. Zack Snyder had big plans, and it wasn't just 3 Justice League movies. And I don't know about you, whether you hate Snyder or not, and I don't. I think he's a pioneer and he's a visionary. He was going to give us something that looked good, was going to be epic, was going to be amazing, and we missed out. And as I said yesterday, it kind of boggles the mind that we didn't get it. Because as we already know from the former CEO, Greg Silverman, although he is saying some shit that I don't agree with in terms of representation and inclusion, but that's Hollywood. They're activists. They've always been activists. They've just become a lot louder since 2016. We know the Snyder movies, the Snyderverse movies for DC were really, really successful and they all made a profit, right? We know that. We know the plan was fundamentally outstanding and it could have taken DC to another level if people showed patience within it. So we lost a lot. I don't believe that Zack Snyder will ever move on from the Snyderverse. I believe that Zack Snyder is desperate to restore the Snyderverse. Zack's very interesting. Unlike other creatives, when they ask him about the Snyderverse, he's very open. He's very forthcoming. A lot of directors by now will be saying, do you know what? I've moved on. Let's talk about Rebel Moon. But no, he don't just want to talk about Rebel Moon. He wants to talk about DC. He wants to talk about Blue Beetle. He wants to talk about what he did in DC. He wants to talk about what he was going to do with DC. And it's a very, very kind of, I always say this, but it's a very, very strange time to be a DC fan. You don't know whether to turn left or right because you've got James Gunn kind of confusing the narrative. You've got James Gunn's castings, you've got James Gunn's plans. But over there, Zack Snyder is still looming. I read a very interesting article on Screen Rant that, kind of says it's unbreakable. And I think the Snyderverse is unbreakable because when you keep on hearing about, maybe the Air Cut being released, David Ayer desperate for that to happen. Who knows if that's ever going to happen? He's certainly pushing for it. But we do know that James Gunn has never posted online, released the Air Cut. All James Gunn is interested in is his vision, his ego, building up something for himself that can be successful. But the question is, has James Gunn got it in his locker, not just to be a good writer-director, which he certainly is, but to be a successful co-CEO of DC Studios? He's never been a CEO of anything in his life. And we've never really asked the question, what does his job title mean? What does co-CEO of DC Studios mean? He's not really a CEO now, is he? Basically, he's a showrunner. He's in charge of the creativity of DC Universe, the television, the animation, the films, and putting it all together. The problem is we still don't know what's canon and what's not, and it really is confusing. He hasn't helped in attempting to sell his new vision. In fact, someone, I think it was my good friend Cal, one of my subscribers here on Movies TV Mad, who said, basically, he's drowning in the quicksand. And when he's asked about these things, he's either rude, he ignores people, which they all do, at least James Gunn kind of replies sometimes, but his answers are not very satisfactory and they seem very, very disingenuous, and every time he speaks, he seems to confuse the issue even more. Confusing the issue even more is the fact that he's interfered with these final few DCEU movies. He didn't interfere with Shazam! Fury of the Gods because that film didn't really matter. I think Black Adam was released just as he was coming in, didn't touch Black Adam. The Rock and his production company and that brilliant director would never have allowed James Gunn to interfere with that film, and thank fuck he didn't, because Black Adam is a brilliant blockbuster DC movie. That's my opinion, doesn't have to be yours. So he interfered with the Flash movie. He's interfering with Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. And I believe there's no need for him to be interfering with these remaining DCEU movies. Why? Because he could have done a fresh reboot, which means you don't need to put George Clooney at the end of the movie. Now, I don't understand why George Clooney's there. I suppose it's supposed to be a gag. It isn't funny. It isn't exciting. I could have lived without George Clooney cameoing in the Flash movie. So that is his level of interference, and he can say, well, I left most of the film alone, but it's the pivotal moments of the film you're interfering with. It's the ending. And we still have no idea if Ezra Miller will remain as the Flash. I find that very, very unlikely, but nobody really knows what's going on. People have said to me, well, maybe they won't do any more Flash because the movie flopped. The Flash movie didn't flop because of the Flash. It flopped because the people made a bad movie. Because Ezra Miller is a problematic person. Legally, that's a factual statement. You can defend them as much as you want. It's facts. Ezra Miller is a problematic person. Now, if you look at former Smallville actor Alison Mack, who was part of some kind of sex cult and was proven to be, she's done her time. She's come out of prison now. So if I saw her, I would embrace her and say, you know what, Al? You've done your time. You gave me so much pleasure as Chloe in Smallville. Your performances were brilliant. What you did was utterly wrong, but you were clearly manipulated. You have done your time. Let's all move on, and let's hope you have a successful career from here on in. Now, I'm sure she wasn't the perfect person even before that, but none of us are. We're all flawed. Ezra Miller has never really paid the price for their crimes, and they have committed crimes. They've somewhat got away with it, and I think the public saw that and said, we're not supporting this man's film. They're getting away with terrible acts. And I think that's why, partially, the Flash movie flopped, but there were a multitude of reasons that the Flash failed, and one of them was it wasn't a particularly good movie. It was a good movie in places. Ezra Miller's performance, whatever you think of them, whatever I think of them, was outstanding and was one of the strengths of the movie. But people, as I've already said, don't really want to compliment Ezra Miller, and actually just watching him, or watching them, should I say, I knew I would get it wrong in one sentence. Just by watching them, just watching Ezra Miller, it was very, very uncomfortable, because you look at them and you know what they've done. You've seen the Instagram posts and the Instagram videos and the threats that they made on Instagram and other things that we saw them do. We saw them threaten a young woman in Iceland. We saw that. We saw it with our own eyes. It wasn't CGI. It wasn't made up. They weren't baseless accusations. We could sit here all day and talk about the Flash movie. But the more you look at DC since Snyder's left, the bigger mess it's become. But people still want to blame Zack Snyder for that mess. I mean, this guy isn't fucking Zeus. He can't fucking create flop after flop. Snyder was doing something interesting. And some of you people wanted MCU type movies, but you got them, but they weren't very good. Look at what they did to our beloved Gal as Wonder Woman in Fury of the Gods and The Flash. Terrible. That's not the Gal Gadot of BVS, who was brilliant. That's not the Gal Gadot Wonder Woman from the Wonder Woman movie, which we loved. I'd even say those cameos are shitter than the Wonder Woman we got in Wonder Woman 1984. So they bastardized her as well. And this is the problem with modern day Hollywood, and I just said it on Twitter earlier on. Because they've gone so IP mad. But IPs are not that easy to do, because they're using IPs to recreate history, to rewrite history, to push their political propaganda via these huge IPs, and it's not working. Because people do want to see comic book accuracy, novelization accuracy. What they want is a balance. They'll be okay with you going your own direction to a point, as long as you're faithful with the characters and the world building and the worlds that we're seeing. There has to be a balance, and Hollywood no longer has that nuance with IPs. It just wants to do its own political thing. So it's a huge deal to do IPs, and it also shows you the lack of originality. And you know, DC and Marvel and Star Wars are huge IPs, and there's a responsibility in those IPs. Why am I talking about this? Because Zack Snyder took over a huge IP in DC. He did exactly the right thing. Superman feels like Superman. I know some of you don't think that, but I believe, especially Man of Steel, he really feels like Superman. But he's more contemporary. He's more modern day. He's more, he's a bit more of a sterner Superman. But if you go back to George Reeves, the first live action Superman, and the original Action Comics #1 Superman, they were also much sterner Superman that didn't smile very often. Don't forget, Christopher Reeve came 40 years after the original Action Comics #1. And by then, he had become more campier and more smilier. But Action Comics #1, the George Reeves Superman, was sterner, and they didn't take no shit. So it all depends what you've consumed. Because I'm a Superman fan, I know a lot about the character, I know a lot about the comics, and I know originally he was this sterner, gruffer guy who used to beat up, mine owners who was taking advantage of their employees, men who used to beat up their wives. Superman was a very, very different character at the beginning. It's only later on he became the smiley kind of order of the status quo and the White House's bitch, which nobody really liked, and that's when Superman started to lose his popularity. I think it's important when you're making live action Superman to go back to Action Comics #1, to look at George Reeves' performance as well, and look at that Superman. And also look at when you look at Snyder and what he did with Cavill's Superman, you can look at Action Comics #1 actually, and there's lots of similarities to it. And you may not notice them by just watching it once, but I think there's a lot of comparisons with George Reeves' Superman and Phyllis Coates' Lois Lane in comparison to Amy Adams' Lois Lane as well. Snyder did a great thing as well with the first flight scene, because if you actually read the original comics, Superman never flew at first. Actually, a lot of the stuff we see today was introduced through the radio Superman serial they introduced in the 50s or late 40s. It was a big deal. Superman was so popular, everyone gathered around those radios. So Superman couldn't originally fly. So Snyder does a really clever thing with the first flight. Superman jumps a couple of times. Why? Because in the original comics, Superman didn't fly. He jumped from skyscraper to skyscraper. So Snyder gets it. Snyder gets this DC universe a lot more than people give him credit for. And then in the original first flight scene, after jumping a few times, he flies, but he falls. And then the second time in the first flight sequence, he flies properly. That is the whole analogy of how Superman didn't fly at first. And what Snyder's doing here is showing Superman earned the right to be able to fly. He's not flying confidently at the beginning. So people can't say, well, how comes he knows how to fly? Well, he doesn't, right? He feels he can fly within himself. You feel if you can do something, but I think that first flight is a beautiful moment. The camera now and the attention is on James Gunn's door. Because believe you me, no matter what people say on Twitter, no matter what some people say, Man of Steel is a great contemporary Superman movie. And you're really going to know how popular that movie was. Made 650 million, still very solid for a superhero movie. Not outstanding, not record-breaking, but solid, right? And I think that figure was enough to get a direct sequel to Man of Steel instead of Batman vs Superman Dawn of Justice. I think that's very important to say. I think it's only when we see Superman Legacy you're going to realise, if you didn't realise before and you underestimated Man of Steel, how good Man of Steel really is. Because modern day audiences don't want dialogue after dialogue. You can't let me be clear here. Without Superman the movie, which was my first movie I ever saw and my introduction to Superman, I don't fall in love with that character. But you cannot recreate the Reeves Superman. You can't recreate Superman the movie. People will not sit there for 2.5 hours while Clark and Lois are having long, stretches of dialogue in the Daily Planet. and I only spoke about this a few weeks ago. The pacing of Man of Steel is very fast and quick and action-packed for a reason, because Zack Snyder understands the contemporary audience are not very patient. So it's going to be very, very interesting what direction James Gunn's going to go in here, because I believe if he tries to copy and paste the Reeves Superman the movie, he could get himself in a lot of trouble. What Gunn's out may be here is that he's world building the rest of the DC universe via his first movie, Superman Legacy. And I think that's important. There's going to be a lot of DC Universe characters introduced to Superman Legacy. And I said a few weeks ago, I agree and I approve of that. I don't mind that. I don't need it just to be a Superman movie. Some people were trying to throw shade at Gunn for that, but I don't think there's any problem with James doing that. I find that very exciting. We do need some world building. You do need to get, move the ground running as soon as you can. And basically, building out the DC Universe via Superman Legacy will be very, very important. And it will excite audiences. But there will be a comparison between Superman Legacy and Man of Steel. And it'll be very interesting. Very interesting indeed what people make of Superman Legacy opposed to Man of Steel. James Gunn's only got two options here. Success or failure. He's put his head above the parapet. He got rid of Henry Cavill. No matter what he says, he did. He made the decision, as far as we know, unless it was Zaslav or someone else, that Cavill wouldn't remain as Superman. He has put so much pressure upon himself for doing this. So I think it's very important that he's put, as I say, pressure on himself. So Superman Legacy lives and dies on James Gunn's decision making. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you, oh, it's going to flop and people are going to say Man of Steel is better. But there's a lot of pressure on him. There's a lot of people who want him to fail. There's a lot of people who want him to succeed, I believe, in equal measure. But ultimately, it doesn't matter who wants you to succeed or fail in life. It's whether you succeed or not. If the film makes a profit, it's a success, and they'll do more and they'll do more DC Universe. If it fails, which means it doesn't make money like the Flash movie is what you call a flop. You can't call Man of Steel or BVS a flop. You can't call Shazam a flop. If a film makes more than it's spent, or let's just say, like, for example, clearly the Flash movie, made about 300 million, which is just about a little bit more than its budget. Well, there's no profit in that. But what I'm saying is, if it doubles its profits like Black Adam did, you can't call it a flop. People are calling Black Adam a flop, but even though it only made 400 million and The Rock put his hands up, he accepted it. It was very interesting a week ago. Zachary Levi still crying his little heart out about the failure of Shazam Fury of the Gods and blaming everyone else but the studio himself, the other cast and the director and writers of the movie, and blaming us, the fans and the critics. Where The Rock, just put his hands up and said, we didn't meet expectations, we failed, and I'm very, very sad about that. But in fact, The Rock and his people and the people he put together made a very good movie, and there's no question about that. But some people can accept failure. I don't think Black Adam is a failure. But James Gunn has put a lot of noses out of joint already. But we know what he seems to want to do. We seem to understand his plan, and most of it seems like a full reboot. But there's still slight elements that don't make sense, like keeping Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman. That's just the weirdest shit. By the way, I'm not totally convinced that Gal Gadot will remain as Wonder Woman, and I think things will change. I don't think they're ready to say that they want to part with her. I think Gunn, if it was up to him, will part with Gal Gadot. I think it's Zaslav who doesn't want to part with Gal Gadot because he thinks she's a name, that she's popular. But just because you're popular, it doesn't mean your movie is going to succeed, because Gal Gadot isn't a movie star. She's just someone who's popular in one role. And I think, that's important to understand. There is no movie stars. Movie stars, with the exception of Tom Cruise, don't put butts in seats. I don't understand why. I understand why Tom Cruise is able to do it, but I don't understand how we got to the place where movie stars can't sell a movie anymore. But it just goes to show you, because the IP became the star. The directors became the stars. The studios became the stars. You're either WB or Disney. You're either DC or Marvel, or whatever side you're taking today. So the actors took a back seat. It's a really weird environment to be in. But I think that Zack Snyder succeeded in what he wanted to do. The only issue is they never allowed him to finish it. And he's never going to give up on restoring the Snyderverse. That's why he and his people will never stop talking about it. And until these actors age out, there'll always be an opportunity for Zack to restore the Snyderverse. But even if they did age out, Zack could do something new at DC of his own. Of course, it's always going to be a tragedy for me that we won't see all these movies and his Flashpoint and everything that he ultimately had planned. But he made 3 great movies. You're talking about over 8 hours of content, and amazing DC movies for me personally. And they can never take that away from him, and they can never take it away from us, the people who actually liked it. Because ultimately, all the Snyder haters, they've got to answer one question: have things improved since he's gone? Now, clearly, if Ben Affleck did do his Batman movie, there'll be no Matt Reeves the Batman. I still think Ben Affleck's movie would have been far superior than Matt Reeves the Batman movie, even though I love the Batman movie. I think the Joker movie would have happened whoever was running things. And that's fine and that's brilliant. Todd Phillips is a genius. And I can't wait to see his Joker 2, Joker Folie à Deux. But has anything been better than what Snyder delivered since he's left? Well, very few. I'd say Black Adam and Aquaman were really, really good. And I enjoyed those films. And the first Shazam was okay. And that is it, everyone. Everything else has been an unmitigated disaster since Zack Snyder left. Now it's over to James Gunn. It's over to James Gunn to show us that the ego is based on something, that his confidence is based on something. He's been tasked in creating a brand new DC universe. There can be no excuses. Xolo Maradona said the other day, it's up to the fans to support Blue Beetle. No, it's up to you and your director to have made a good movie. And if you've done that, people will come back and back again. Because even though Barbie has a lot of rewriting of history and a lot of commentary in there, I think problematic commentary, it's still, from what I'm hearing, because I refuse to watch it, a really entertaining movie that people are going back to. So no matter what your commentary in the film is, if you do the right things by your audience, which is entertaining them, cola must taste of cola, and entertainment must be entertaining. Whether you're telling the story of how John F. Kennedy was assassinated, there must be an element of entertainment and getting my focus, which is what Oliver Stone did with JFK and all his other kind of biopic kind of movies. And, so that's what Barbie does from what people are telling me, and that's good. Movies, entertainment, must be entertaining. But there is elements in this industry who believe it's the audience's fault when something fails. No, there's only one fail: when you don't deliver. If you make me a cup of tea and I've told you exactly how I like it and I don't like it, it's down to the tea maker's fault. It's down to the tea maker and not the person drinking it. You can't put the fault at someone who's consuming, who's doing the consumption. But this is what New Hollywood have attempted to do. The Witcher's failing, they're blaming dumb America apparently, and an emotional younger generation. Isn't it interesting, everyone? Hollywood is on its knees because it never accepts culpability. Will James Gunn accept culpability when he fails? Zachary Levi and David F. Sandberg and Rachel Zegler didn't accept culpability for the disaster that was Shazam! Fury of the Gods. Andy Muschietti, Walter Hamada, and basically Ezra Miller didn't accept culpability for the disaster that was the Flash movie. Will James Gunn accept culpability if he fails with his DC universe? Well, sooner or later, that question will be answered.